The Cold War, a comprehensive explanation. The Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension and ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, dominated global affairs from the end of World War II in 1945 to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Unlike traditional wars, this conflict was fought not on battlefields, but through proxy wars, espionage, propaganda, and an intense arms race. Let's delve deep into the key events, causes, and consequences of this fascinating period in history. Chapter 1. Origins of the Cold War. The seeds of the Cold War were sown during World War II. While the US and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany, their alliance was one of convenience rather than shared values. The US, a capitalist democracy, and the USSR, a communist state, had fundamentally opposing ideologies. Yalta and Potsdam Conferences, 1945. At these meetings, Allied leaders discussed the post-war order. Tensions arose as the Soviet Union sought to expand its influence in Eastern Europe. Stalin's insistence on creating a buffer zone of communist states alarmed the US and its allies, who advocated for free elections in these regions. Iron Curtain Speech, 1946. Winston Churchill's famous speech highlighted the division of Europe into Eastern, communist, and Western capitalist blocs. This metaphorical Iron Curtain symbolized the growing divide. Truman Doctrine, 1947. The US pledged to support countries resisting communism. This doctrine marked the beginning of America's policy of containment, aimed at stopping the spread of communism. Marshall Plan, 1948. To rebuild war-torn Europe and prevent communist influence, the US provided $13 billion in economic aid. The Soviet Union saw this as a threat and refused aid for Eastern Bloc countries. Berlin Blockade and Airlift, 1948-1949. When the Soviet Union blocked access to West Berlin, the US and its allies organized a massive airlift to supply the city. This event demonstrated the stark divisions in post-war Europe. Nuclear arms race. The US developed the first atomic bomb in 1945, but by 1949 the Soviet Union had its own. This led to an arms race, with both sides amassing vast nuclear arsenals and developing more powerful weapons, such as the hydrogen bomb. The doctrine of MAD ensured that both nations avoided direct conflict, as any nuclear exchange would lead to total annihilation. The Cold War extended into space. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, in 1957, shocking the US. The Americans responded by creating NASA and landing the first man on the moon in 1969. Korean War, 1950-1953. North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, invaded South Korea. The US led a United Nations coalition to repel the invasion, resulting in a stalemate and the division of Korea. Vietnam War, 1955-1975. The US fought to prevent communist North Vietnam from taking over South Vietnam. The war ended in US withdrawal and the unification of Vietnam under communist rule. The discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. A tense standoff ended with the Soviet Union removing the missiles in exchange for US assurances not to invade Cuba. Spy networks. Espionage played a key role, with agencies like the CIA and KGB conducting covert operations. High-profile cases such as the U-2 incident highlighted the constant surveillance and intelligence-gathering efforts. Cultural propaganda. Both sides used media and culture to promote their ideologies. Films, literature, and music became tools of persuasion. Radio stations like Voice of America broadcast Western ideals behind the Iron Curtain. The Cold War extended beyond Europe and America into Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Middle East, the US and USSR vied for influence in countries like Iran and Afghanistan. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 led to US support for Afghan Mujahideen fighters. Africa. Many newly independent African nations became battlegrounds for Cold War rivalries. For example, the Angolan Civil War saw the US and USSR backing opposing factions. Latin America. In Chile and Nicaragua, US intervention aimed to prevent the spread of communism. The Cuban Revolution, led by Fidel Castro, made Cuba a key ally of the Soviet Union. Détente, 1970s. A period of reduced tensions saw arms control agreements like Saltipar and improved US-Soviet relations. However, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan ended this era. US President Ronald Reagan adopted a hardline stance, calling the USSR an evil empire. The arms race intensified with initiatives like the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. Gorbachev's reforms. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, to address economic stagnation and political unrest. Eastern Europe revolutions. 1989, communist regimes in Eastern Europe collapsed, symbolized by the fall of the Berlin Wall. Soviet collapse. 1991. Economic struggles, nationalist movements, and failed reforms led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This marks the official end of the Cold War. Conclusion. The Cold War shaped the modern world in profound ways. It defined international relations, spurred technological and scientific advancements, and left a legacy of caution regarding nuclear proliferation. Though the Cold War ended decades ago, its echoes remain in today's geopolitics, reminding us of the delicate balance between power and peace.